They say the mind plays tricks when you're vulnerable, but what if the real terror lies just beneath the surface? My name is Elena. I had never imagined my life would spiral into a nightmare, but here I am, standing at the edge of a reality I can't escape. After the loss of my mother, I needed a fresh start, something to bury the pain and silence the memories. The house I moved into seemed like the perfect solution, quiet, isolated, and far from the world I was trying to forget. Little did I know I was walking straight into a twisted web of fear, something far darker than grief itself. Emotionally drained and desperate for peace, I was a perfect target for whatever was lurking in that house. It started subtly, faint whispers in the middle of the night, a cold draft that would creep down my spine when the windows were closed. At first, I chalked it up to my fragile state of mind, dismissing these small, eerie occurrences as remnants of my trauma. But the deeper I sunk into my own despair, the more the house seemed to wrap itself around me, suffocating me in a way I couldn't explain. This wasn't just my imagination. Something else was there, waiting. There's something about being alone that magnifies every creak, every shadow, every breath of air that feels just a little too cold. I thought I could handle it. I've been through worse, right? But it wasn't long before the fear became real, too real to ignore. The house seemed alive, like it was feeding off my emotions, growing stronger with every ounce of terror that twisted inside me. I had no idea then that I had already opened the door to a nightmare far worse than any dream, and soon it would make itself known. The house stood at the end of a dirt road, tucked away from prying eyes, almost as if it wanted to be forgotten. It had an unsettling aura, one I ignored when I first saw it. Desperation makes you overlook the obvious sometimes. The old wooden structure creaked under the weight of its history, the kind of history no one talks about openly. The real estate agent didn't mention much, just the usual. It's a fixer-upper, needs some love. But there was something off. It felt like the house was waiting for me, and that thought alone chilled me to the bone. Strange things began almost immediately after I moved in. At first, it was minor, easy to brush off. The sound of footsteps above when no one else was home, doors closing by themselves, objects shifting ever so slightly from where I'd left them. My heart would race, but I convinced myself it was just the stress of starting over. It wasn't until I saw the shadow, just out of the corner of my eye, that the fear truly settled in. A shadow that seemed to move when I wasn't looking, as if it was alive watching me. The isolation didn't help. There were no neighbors for miles, no one to confide in or even run to if things got worse. The land surrounding the house was barren, lifeless, as if nothing dared to thrive near it. The deeper I dug into the house's past, the more I realized how much I didn't know. Rumors swirled about a violent death. Some said it was an old murder scene. Others whispered about dark rituals performed in secret. Every new detail felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. And with each piece, the terror grew. It wasn't long before the strange occurrences escalated into something far more sinister. I began hearing whispers at night, faint voices calling my name, barely audible but impossible to ignore. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, sure that someone or something was in the room with me. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow darker, more defined, as if they were gaining form. The worst part? I felt like I was being watched constantly, an invisible presence lurking just beyond my sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Driven by fear, I started looking for answers. I searched online for any mention of the house, hoping to uncover its secrets. That's when I found it. The house had once belonged to a man who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. His disappearance was never solved, and some believed his spirit lingered, trapped between worlds. Then there were the stories of a dark figure seen lurking in the area, a shadow that had haunted this place long before I arrived. Everything I read only deepened the mystery and fed the terror that now clung to me every waking moment. But when I tried to talk to others about what I was experiencing, they didn't believe me. Friends dismissed it as stress, telling me to get out more, to clear my head. Even my family, distant as they were, thought I was overreacting. Their disbelief only isolated me further, leaving me trapped in this house with no one to turn to. Every night, the presence grew stronger, and with each passing day, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear, and I had no idea what was coming next. The first time I saw it clearly, I froze. It was late, sometime around 3 a.m., when I was jolted awake by a loud bang from downstairs. My pulse raced as I slowly made my way to the hallway, and there it was, a dark figure standing at the far end of the room, just staring at me. Its shape was human, but distorted, as if it didn't fully belong in this world. My breath caught in my throat, and all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of terror. This was no nightmare. It was real, and it was happening. Panic surged through me, and I ran. I didn't care where. I just needed to get out. But no matter how fast I moved, it was like the house itself was against me. Doors that I knew were unlocked wouldn't budge. Windows were sealed shut, trapping me inside. I could hear the figure behind me, its steps slow and deliberate, as if it was toying with me. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me as the darkness swallowed every bit of light. I knew then there was no escaping this horror. Desperation took over. I tried everything: prayers, pleading, even throwing things at the shadowy figure. But nothing worked. It stood there, unmoving, as if feeding on my fear. That night I realized it wasn't just the house that had trapped me. Something far darker, far more malevolent had taken hold. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of whatever twisted reality this place harbored, and it wasn't going to let me go. Each time I tried to escape, it would pull me back, dragging me deeper into the nightmare. After that night, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I had to find out what had happened in this house, why it felt like the walls were closing in on me. Digging through old records, I found something horrifying. This place had been the site of a series of violent deaths, all connected by a dark, twisted history. There had been rumors of a man who dabbled in black magic, rituals that went horribly wrong, and a curse that had bound his spirit to the house. The more I uncovered, the more I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple haunting. The worst part? It wasn't just about the house. I started to see connections to my own life, strange coincidences that couldn't be ignored. The man who had lived here before shared my last name, and according to the few records I found, he was some distant relative. It felt like fate had led me to this place, like I was meant to be here. That realization was more terrifying than any ghost or shadow. This wasn't just a random haunting. I was tied to whatever evil lingered here, bound by blood and history. I tried to deny it, to tell myself it was just paranoia. But deep down I knew I had unleashed something ancient and powerful, and now it was coming for me. The house had been waiting, not for just anyone, but for me specifically. Every nightmare, every shadow creeping around me was connected to that terrible history. And now there was no turning back. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to rest until it had claimed what it came for. The terror was only beginning. From that moment on, the terror became relentless. The entity no longer hid in the shadows. It showed itself boldly, stalking me in every corner of the house. Every time I turned a corner, it was there, looming over me, its twisted form growing more defined with each encounter. The air became thick with a suffocating presence, and the nights were filled with whispers so loud they drowned out my thoughts. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, and my body was beginning to feel the strain. Desperate for help, I sought out anyone who might have answers. I found a local historian who had heard the legends surrounding the house, and a medium who claimed to have dealt with such entities before. They both said the same thing. The only way to rid myself of this evil was to confront it head-on. But the process was dangerous, possibly fatal. The entity wasn't just some wandering spirit. It was tied to the rituals that had taken place here, and breaking that connection would require an immense sacrifice. It was a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take, but I had no choice. The longer I stayed, the more aggressive the entity became. It started to leave physical marks on me. Scratches appeared on my skin, bruises formed overnight. The house was attacking me, both mentally and physically. Every day felt like a battle for survival, and I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The entity wanted something, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it came for. The time was running out, and the fear of death was creeping closer every second. The night of the final confrontation came faster than I expected. I prepared myself, following the instructions the medium had given me. Candles, incantations, and symbols drawn across the floors in a desperate attempt to ward off the evil. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the entity's presence, stronger than ever, watching, waiting. As I stood in the center of the room, clutching the talisman meant to protect me, the lights flickered and then died. Darkness swallowed the house, and in that moment, I knew it was here. The battle wasn't what I expected. There was no grand display of power, no physical fight. It was a battle of wills, a test of my strength to confront the very fear that had been consuming me. The entity surrounded me, whispering in a voice that chilled my bones, taunting me with every past trauma, every loss. It tried to break me, to make me give in to the terror, but I stood my ground. This was the moment everything had led to, the moment where I either gave in or fought back with everything I had. In the final moments, I realized what the entity truly wanted. It wasn't just to torment me, but to possess me, to take control of my body and soul. The sacrifice it demanded wasn't something material. It was me. I had to make a choice: surrender to it or use what little strength I had left to drive it back. With a surge of defiance, I recited the words I had memorized, calling on whatever forces might be listening. The entity shrieked, the room shook violently, and then silence. It was gone, or so I thought. In the aftermath, the silence was deafening. I stood there shaking, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt still, almost peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I wanted to believe I had won, that I had somehow rid the place of the evil that had tormented me for so long. But as I moved through the house, everything felt wrong. The shadows were still too dark, and the air too thick. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting. I tried to go back to my normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every creak in the floorboards sent a shiver down my spine. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far, linger a little too long. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark figure, felt its presence lurking just out of sight. The terror that had gripped me for so long hadn't left. It had simply changed form. The entity may have been gone, but its memory clung to me like a second skin, impossible to shed. Then one night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard it again, the faint whisper calling my name. My blood turned to ice. I shot up, heart racing, and saw it just for a second. A fleeting shadow slipping into the corner of the room, disappearing into the darkness. The relief I had felt was gone. The terror wasn't over. It had never left. It was just waiting, watching, biding its time. And deep down, I knew it wasn't done with me yet. Even now, I can't escape the feeling that it's still out there, lurking just beyond the edge of reality, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The house may have fallen silent for a time, but the terror is far from gone. Every day is a reminder that the evil I faced wasn't defeated. It was merely pushed back. I've moved far away from that place, but no matter where I go, I can still feel its presence. It's like a shadow that never leaves, a constant reminder of what I barely survived. There are moments when I catch myself questioning everything. Did I really survive? Or am I still trapped in that nightmare, living in a twisted loop of fear and horror? Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of a shadow that doesn't belong, or hear a whisper that chills me to the bone. I'll lie awake at night, straining to hear that familiar voice, knowing that one day it might come back. And if it does, I won't be able to stop it this time. The fear is always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to pull me back into the nightmare. So now I live in constant vigilance, knowing that the cycle may repeat itself. I've seen what lies on the other side, and I know it's only a matter of time before it tries to claim me again. Maybe next time, it won't let me escape. Maybe next time, the nightmare will become permanent. I don't know how much time I have left, but one thing is certain. The terror isn't over. It never really ends. It just waits in the shadows, biding its time for the next victim.